Chapter 17, The Micronics. I see some new faces, so let me start over, Fox said. Gentlemen, you're here to check on an investment, correct? That investment was the Micronics, the mental computer interface. It was marketed to your agencies as a major leap in telecommunications. Fox jumped into the pitch. A single device that could translate and transmit any intercepted data stream directly into the user's mind. A signal into your head. He'd given this pitch 1,000 times. The idea was, no more monitors, no more keyboards, no more invasive data ports, plugs, or memory sticks. Nothing but a handheld signal amplifier. Fox reached into his pocket and pulled out the Micronics. He stood it on the table next to him. It was part of the pitch. The bell ringer. Damn. Fox told everyone they'd all been destroyed in the accident. Now he'd gone and shown it to them. What the hell, Doctor? The room remained silent. Fox relaxed. He had an answer to the next question. I thought you said they'd all been destroyed, Harris asked. No, this is the original prototype. This is a marketing placebo, he said. He jumped ahead. Call to action. We've got flying chariots and cities in the clouds, right? This should have worked. After all, what are we if not liquid core computers? Fox paused for dramatic effect, but the presentation had derailed when the Absalon facility was reduced to a layer of dust on the desert floor. Simply to fill the silence, Fox continued. We naturally transmit electrical signals to the brain. We hope to communicate digitally without any physical invasion. The brain is just a network of neurons transmitting electrical signals. It should have worked just as easily as we transform signals from the retina or the eardrum. Just communicate with the frontal lobes, without inserting any wiring into the mind itself. Getting wired and plugged has its own problems. The idea was to eliminate all of that. Fox picked up the prototype. The plan was to go wireless. No fiber optics, no wires in the brain. That was the idea anyhow. We just couldn't make it work. Initially, half the subjects couldn't even link with it. You need a certain amount of intellectual capacity just to use it at all. If the subject wasn't smart enough, it, just sort of fried their brains. The delegates remained quiet. Some people could receive but not transmit, some got nosebleeds, some went comatose, and then there was, well, more significant damage. Significant how? Senator Clark asked. Permanently significant, Dr. Fox replied. Explain, please. Fox took a deep breath. One guy blew his brains out, and I don't mean suicide, not with a gun or anything. His mind, his brain, it overheated and exploded all over the room. We kept them isolated during their first experience just in case. We set the interface on a table, just like this, only we had an airlock. We told them the risks. We gave them the information and let them make their own decision. Fox looked at the floor, feeling ashamed. In that very first instant of contact, the moment your hand touches the item, some people claim the time slowed down or stopped altogether. Those were the ones still capable of communication. The others, Dr. Fox shook his head. Senator Cheryl Warrington spoke up from the back row. And you continued the trials through all of this? The revulsion in her voice was tangible. Formerly a medical doctor, Cheryl was the only female delegate present. This was her first encounter with the project. Fox noted the frustration and anger in her voice. He sympathized with her but suspected she was out of her league. Fox knew the hubris she'd discovered here was as poisonous as any disease she'd ever tackled as the nation's Surgeon General. Now serving her first term as a state senator, Fox suspected it had been a long 4 years. She didn't look as if she could do 2 more. Secrets can be like a cancer in your brain, rotting your soul. Watching the senator, Fox realized her internal pressure cooker had finished preheating. He smiled. After all, it was classified, and she couldn't talk to anyone else. She may as well take her frustration out on those responsible. Unfortunately, those responsible applied mostly to Fox himself. You killed how many people with this little fiasco? Senator Warrington asked. Dr. Fox seemed confused. I'm sorry, you want what, numbers? I want to know how many people died because of this project. Fox didn't answer. How many? The senator shouted. Fox knew he shouldn't jerk her around. Briefs are supposed to be brief. 47,501. She smiled. Don't jerk me around, Doctor. Senator, Dr. Warrington, I wouldn't dream of giving you false facts. You asked me how many people died because of this project, and that number is 47,501. I have a photographic memory. I just copy-paste. Cute. No, really, it's kind of cool. Do the math. Out loud, I delivered the report. All the facts are there. Well, let's see the photographic memory in action. Fox hesitated. Is there a problem, Doctor? She asked. I'm just not sure what it is you want. I want to know. Oh, please, Harris interrupted her. These are death row inmates. He rolled his eyes. Can we please get on with the rest of our business now, Cheryl? Are you screwing me, Jack? Senator Warrington snapped. Perhaps she'd meant to say, are you screwing with me, but didn't. Thank heavens no, Congressman Harris laughed. Some of the other delegates dared to laugh at the congressman, and the fearless bodyguard smiled. The room got brighter for a moment. Warrington jumped in with both feet, splashing the goodwill from the room. Then address me as Senator. Fox sighed. She'd lost it. It was too late for a real argument. Her train of thought had jumped its tracks. Fox wasn't even the object of her ire anymore. It had been misdirected onto the foil, the jester, the clown. Fox knew it was Harris's job to confuse people like the ex-Surgeon General. He'd been assigned by Clark to lighten things up, should too much integrity or responsibility be called for. Fox thought she looked like she might walk out, but she was too angry to leave. Could we project this beam at an enemy? Senator Clark asked. The delegates leaned forward. Could it be used as a weapon? Clark restated. Doesn't work that way. Everyone would need to be holding signal amplifiers. You need a gateway, and it would need to work, which it doesn't. Besides, we lost all our research. We're back at square one. You expect us to believe there weren't any backups? A banking delegate asked. We lost everything. The backup servers burned all over the world. We lost one in London, one in New Delhi, 2 in China. You had backups in China? Harris fumed. Clark held up his hand. You lost everything except your personal amplifier. Senator Clark challenged Dr. Fox. Andrew lifted the device from its place on the table. It's scrap metal, he said. That's our property, Harris said. Are you sure you want it? Fox asked. I vaguely recall something about shared abilities, Miller asked, changing the subject. Ah, the talent thingy, Fox said. Talent thingy? Harris asked. A technical term, Fox shrugged. Explain it, Miller said. Say Guy X knows how to speak Chinese. Suddenly Guy Z can too. They were reading each other's minds? They were accessing each other's learning centers, not memory. Everyone thinks memory is where the human mind would overlap, but not at all. The brain is most similar in how it stores acquired skills, language, mathematics. That's still mind reading, Clark said. It's more like borrowing each other's power tools if you need an analogy. Harris pointed at the prototype sitting on the table. Can you read our minds with that thing? He asked. Fox smiled. It can read your mind without it, Congressman. Seems you want to get to know Senator Warrington better. A few laughs were heard. Senator Clark wants a gin and tonic, and that guy wants a club sandwich. The whole room was laughing. Fox continued. For the record, they could not, and I cannot, read minds. We had some speaking in foreign languages, but since you sent me condemned criminals, what we mostly saw was a staggering rise in escape attempts and violent attacks on the guards. I objected then, I'm objecting now. To be fair, you people, or your direct superiors, are responsible for the deaths and the failure of this project. No one spoke. After a considerable silence, Fox continued. At any rate, shortly after the manifestation of unlearned skills, the headache started, followed by hemorrhaging from the eyes, nose, ears, sometimes seizures. Did a lot of the subjects have headaches? Senator Miller said. We all did, Fox answered. What do you mean you, the assistants, everybody? Miller inquired. All of us, yes, we were all connected, Fox answers. And when it exploded, where were you? Clark asked. I was traveling. What aren't you telling us? Harris asked. How much time do you have? Tell us when you first thought there might be a problem. As soon as you changed this project from a volunteer status to an execution alternative, I tried to shut the project down several times. I spoke with each of you at length about it. An hour prior to the explosion, I spoke with you, Senator Miller. You insisted on waiting a week to shutter the facility. Senator Clark leaned forward. Did you learn those skills you mentioned? Fox shook his head. I didn't manifest any new abilities. It might have been because I was first, but I also didn't spend a lot of time with the test subjects. I was occupied with changes, improvements to the source code. The room remained silent for a few moments. Gentlemen, I have nothing further. Any other questions for me? Back in the canyon, Evan stood before the fearless Ashley, arm raised overhead. If he swung, Ash knew she was getting hit. There was no way she could move fast enough, but she was betting he wouldn't hit a defenseless girl. Doug and Jamie, camouflaged commandos, leapt from their place deep in the grass. Attack! Doug yelled. An ambush exploded all around them. Clods of dirt and grass were hurling toward Evan and his gang of hoverboarders. Loud cracks could be heard as the springs of their toy guns snapped plastic on plastic, rocketing yellow BBs that buzzed and cut through the air. Ashley could see them streaking past, hissing like mutant insects on steroids. While the ambush was psychologically something of a success, the older kids escaped serious damage to the head and neck. Thankfully, no one lost an eye. The guerrilla commandos were sticking to the traditional hit-and-run tactics, but that just meant they'd get picked off one at a time by the air-mobile adolescents. Ash looked for Jeff and Jack, gesturing for them to back out of the impending battle. The teens would rally, and someone would be crying soon. She hoped, but doubted it would be Evan. Evan saw his quarry attempting to escape and stepped up, getting in Ashley's face again. "Hey, where do you think you're going?" Doug and Jamie stepped in to protect her, their Hornet rifles leveled at Evan's chest. "Leave her alone," Doug said. Faced with the plastic guns, Evan stalled in his advance. "She can stand up for herself," Evan countered. "She's a girl," Jamie yelled, aiming for Evan's face. "It'll be your last mistake," Evan promised. Doug raised his rifle too, aiming for the eyes. "You'll be blind." "Is that a fact?" Evan asked. Ash noticed Bobby, Evan's younger brother, among the commandos who'd come to their rescue. Evan, desperate to escape Doug and Jamie without backing down, followed her line of sight and seeing Bobby went berserk. "What the hell? You're on their side?" he yelled. "We're just playing, Evan." Doug and Jamie lowered their rifles. "Playing," the big brother snapped. "What's the matter with you?" "If it weren't for me, they'd have shot you for real," Bobby said. "Is that a fact?" Evan yelled. Jamie's fingers squeezed the trigger and the Hornet jumped in his hand. 3 BBs streaked past Evan's face. Evan jumped, scared and stumbling. Doug laughed. Evan growled and shot toward them. Doug and Jamie burst into laughter and ran from the enraged teen. They showed no real fear and effortlessly dodged the angry Evan. The air was again filled with laughter. Until, without warning, a dozen huge red laser beams filled the canyon with a crimson glow. The beams formed a giant ring of light, stretching up into the sky, slowly turning clockwise. Someone had fallen from the city above. A rescue operation was underway. The red light let passing vehicles know that the Coast Guard or EMTs were chasing a jumper, hoping to catch him or her before their imminent impact with the unforgiving ground below. The kids were stunned silent, their battle abandoned. Chapter 18. Alexander Pierce. A few moments earlier. As Fox and the assembled delegates prepared to end the briefing, a voice made itself heard. "Excuses don't interest me." Pierce stood, impeccably dressed behind the massive crates crowding his table. The young man looked rather effeminate. His long hair hung in his face, luxuriant fashion model hair. "I was made to understand this briefing concerned items of merit." He grinned at Dr. Fox. "What about the prototype?" "What about it?" Fox replied. "Well, Dr. Fox, I agree with you. I read your report, all 2,500 pages of it, and I agree it was an absurd insult to you and your work for the assembled members to have so grossly perverted the basis of your study by sending you condemned criminals. You see, I also agree with the senators. Prototypes should be our property. We paid for it, in money and in blood. You need to turn it over." "It's worthless," Fox stammered. "It's a paperweight." "Fine, and it's our worthless paperweight. What's all the noise?" "You could hurt yourself. As a doctor, I cannot give this to you. But if you want to come up here and steal my personal property..." Fox gestured to the prototype on the table and stepped away from it. Pierce walked forward, his hands folded behind his back, his eyes locked on Andrew's. "Dr. Fox, I charge you with treason and fraud." "Treason and fraud." Fox rolled his eyes. "That's a new one." Before Fox could stop him, Pierce picked up the slender hunk of metal. He was wearing gloves. "The device is now officially taken into custody as evidence. We had a contract. You agreed to produce the interface, and after a couple minor setbacks you want to give up? I don't think so. You will try again or you will be tried for treason." Secretary of Defense Croswell stood up. "Dr. Fox works for the United States government. You don't give him orders. I do. You don't get to try him for treason. I do. You don't have a contract or investment rights. You get what I give you, and I give you my word, if you don't put that down, you won't leave this room alive, you deluded brat." Pierce didn't move. Croswell continued. Your drunkard of a father should have sent David, like I told him to, not some cocksucking pansy-ass elf. Take your gloves off. I dare you, the secretary taunted him. You won't touch it. You're a coward is why. A no-good, one-way, dumbass little Sally. Pierce smiled and tossed the prototype to the secretary. Several people gasped. The flat rectangle hung in the air between the men. It seemed to move in slow motion. Out of nowhere, Dr. Fox caught the prototype, only inches before it reached the secretary. You called me a traitor, a liar, and a cheat, Dr. Fox said. Pierce's reply was a scowl. Let's settle this the old-fashioned way, Fox said. Pierce smiled. Pistols on the balcony? Winner takes the prize. Fox held up the prototype. What do you say? Director Stanwood stood up. You idiots can kill each other on your own time. The rest of us have business to attend to. He gestured for his assistants to collect the cash and exited the hall. With the money gone, the briefing was definitively over. Croswell nodded to Fox. I'd love to stick around, but you know I can't be party to this. Good luck, Andrew. Whatever happens is a perfectly legal duel. Clark will fill you in on the details. Fox smiled at Clark. Won't you, Senator? Clark nodded, giddy with Shakespearean malice. He hated Fox and Pierce both. He, Miller, and Harris cackled like hyenas, following lions. Moments later, Dr. Fox faced young Alexander outside the clamshell on the building's exterior patio. The remaining delegates watched from behind the bulletproof glass. Andrew was disappointed. There were a couple of guests he'd have happily winged, or even point-blank shot, if afforded the opportunity. Andrew set the prototype on an empty table. Just so we both know where it is, he said. Pierce nodded and peeled the glove from his right hand. He removed his long coat, exposing an antique Colt revolver. He wore the gun low on his thigh, an easy draw. The chrome reflected glittering bits of light as he shifted his weight. Andrew's holster was much higher, on his belt, a much more difficult draw, and impossible to beat Pierce's hip-hugger. As kids, everyone had practiced, but few adults found themselves in an honest-to-goodness showdown. Fox knew he wasn't drunk. Then why did he feel drunk? He hadn't taken any pills that day. He wasn't on pills just now. Andrew decided he was getting some pills if he survived this mess. Fox suddenly found it difficult to breathe. His face felt flush, his throat wet and ragged. His collar was too tight. He could hear his heartbeat ringing in his ears, slamming through his head like a bell. Fox realized his blood pressure was through the roof. He stumbled as a wind threatened to throw him off the balcony and plunged to his knees. He took a deep breath, shook his head, and tried to level out. Keep the mind level, and the whole world stays level, he said to himself. I'm just going to take off my coat. Andrew crashed back into the briefing room. His jacket fell to the floor. He heard his colleagues following him as he rushed toward the bathroom. Fox checked to see that he was entering the men's room, and the next thing he knew, the walls turned sideways, and he was watching red ink pour across white and blue tiles of the bathroom floor. Pierce remained on the balcony. He had no real desire to see Fox shot. What he wanted was right here. He walked over to it. The wind whipped his clothes. He picked up the prototype with his gloved hand. His back to the glass, Pierce tossed it into his bare right hand. When he touched it, he froze. Then he fell forward, hit the railing, and went over. Several emergency vehicles hovered alongside Fujidozo. A Halo team raced off in pursuit of the falling chairman. They reached his angle of descent, cutting off the municipal EMTs and Coast Guard. They deployed lifelights, 12 hover discs that locked into position and split the sky with 4-foot-wide beams of harmless red laser light, tracking Pierce from his current elevation to his projected impact point on the canyon floor. The rescue team streaked through the air toward the citizen. Chapter 19. Splashdown. In the canyon, the crimson pillars had transfixed the children. It's a jumper! They're trying to rescue a jumper! Someone yelled. High above, the kids spotted the jumper. Chairman Pierce, fourth gate citizen and heir to a vast fortune, should he survive to enjoy it. The circle was 20 meters across, the pillars growing fatter as the 3 rescue agents, Halo operatives, or chasers, gained on the plummeting Pierce. A fall from the median city height of 1.5 miles took 90 seconds at terminal velocity. You could count on being rescued by the Coast Guard from any elevation of 7,000 or better. Lower than that and your chances diminish drastically. The Coast Guard and the EMTs caught 90%, but Pierce looked to be that 10th man. The chasers just couldn't reach him. Every time the agents got close, Pierce pulled away, as though he were moving under his own power. Then their altimeters triggered their deceleration kites, slowing them a safe distance above the Earth's surface. Chairman Alexander Pierce, 23 years old, crashed into the canyon floor with a loud smack, splashing blood on the watching children. Alexander's wristwatch, his phone, his gun, all his heavy personal effects bounced free of the pockets, appendages, or holsters. The prototype landed at Ashley's feet. She recognized it as the secret device her father had been carrying around at home. Without a second thought, she bent and picked it up. There was a button on the top right side. She didn't press it, but suddenly realized that something was terribly wrong. Everything was still. No one moved. There was no sound, no wind. The trees stood still. The tall grasses and knee-high ferns held their posture as stiffly as any soldier in formation. The agents hung overhead, suspended above the children. The red beams weren't beams at all, but rather pulses. There were massive gaps where the light alternated, pulses themselves descending slowly, creeping toward the earth. Everything else was frozen. Jeff was nearby. Tiny spots of Pierce's sprayed blood on his skin. The moment stretched into infinity. Ashley wondered if she could move. She was able to use her eyes and turn her head, but when she tried to lift her arm, it felt as if it were made of molten steel. Struggling, she raised her hand and looked at the prototype. It was like the one her father had at home. And in that instant, she knew he was somehow involved. She felt it had come to her through this fallen man. Ash looked over to Jeff. She reached out for his hand. When she touched him, he woke up, coming alive into the frozen moment with her. Jeff, look at me. He did. We have to get Jack and get out of here. Jeff looked at the item in Ashley's hand. Is that Dad's? Ashley pointed upward. The agents hung in place against the sky. Who are they? Jeff asked. We have to go. Ash pulled Jack's leash from her shoulders. But Jeff was awestruck. Mom says you have to do what I say, she reminded him. Only in emergencies, he answered. What do you call this? Ashley snapped, gesturing in real time while everyone else remained frozen. Jeff looked at Jack. Will he wake up if I touch him? He asked. I don't know. You did, Ashley answered. You do it. Jeffrey stepped back. Ash reached out, her hand a few inches from Jack's coat. Ash, how do we know? Ashley stroked his neck and spoke to him. Jack, wake up, boy. We have to go. Come on, wake up. Suddenly the animal was breathing again. Ashley clipped the leash to the choke chain. Their voices sounded normal, but the chain rattled eerily in the frozen time. Jack began to growl. In weird, slow motion, he turned and snapped at Ash. He bared his teeth, dropped his front paws, and growled. Jack, no, Ashley said. Jack's ears, as floppy as they were, went back, and then he was gone. Sprinting away from them, the leash ripped from Ashley's hand. He had growled in slow motion, but now, running away from them, he seemed to be moving in fast forward. His leash dragged through the brush. Ash and Jeff raced after him, running at their own speed in the absurd frozen time. They weren't able to keep up with the puppy. Ashley was faster than Jeff, yet pulling him along she was far too slow to catch the feral pet. I'll go get him and I'll be right back. Ashley didn't wait for a response, and a second later she was sprinting after Jack. In the observation lab, Mr. Reed and the rest of the supervisors were dumbfounded. Their internal feeds from Dr. Fox had gone down. They knew nothing of what was going on aboard Fujidozo. When Pierce fell, their first information of the event had been from Ash and Jeffrey, when they saw the massive laser beams illuminate the canyon floor. When Pierce hit the ground, both Ash and Jeffrey's eyes had tracked the body. They saw the objects that bounced from his corpse. Mr. Reed, Major Ross, and the others watched Ashley's field of vision as it tracked the prototype, from Pierce's hand to land at her feet. They watched Ashley reach down and pick it up, and her system went black. A second later, the system monitoring Jeffrey went offline too. That's no accident, Reed said. Ross chuckled and turned to his desk at the back of the small lab. No accident, huh? Should we call the doctor? For curiosity's sake alone, I suppose, Reed said. But if that was his amplifier, I don't know how he'll answer. Chapter 20. Exposure. The ringing in his head startled Fox. He woke to discover he was lying on the bathroom floor. Someone was shaking him, and he was helped to his feet. In the mirror, blood ran from a gash above his eyebrow. Fox scanned his consciousness for the micronics. It wasn't there. He ran his hands over his pockets. Pierce took it, someone said, presuming Fox was looking for the prototype. He fell off the balcony, another added. We saw a rescue team go after him, but... Fox leaned on the sink and looked into the mirror. He felt nauseous. The micronics provided visual and audio enhancement. Without it, Fox found his eyes had grown weak. Focusing was difficult and increased his nausea. Without his mind supported by the familiar comfort of the operating system, Fox found himself on foreign ground. He forced himself to open his eyes and focus. He realized this was the first time in almost 30 years that he'd seen anything with his own eyes. He thought of the Metacron. He was still at home, but the second prototype was dangerous. He didn't want to touch it. A second later, he was racing into a stall, the contents of his stomach splashing into water and white porcelain. Back among the other kids, time never stopped. Pierce crashed into the canyon floor with a devastating smack. There was blood everywhere. The trio of kite-bound agents descended toward the scene. Bobby, Evan, and Doug discovered the items tumbling to rest at their feet. Evan picked up Pierce's phone. Doug retrieved a bloody wristwatch. The band had snapped. Bobby, having approached the group during the argument with his brother, found Mr. Pierce's revolver at his feet. The items all contained significant amounts of terrelium, encoded by the prototype. The amplifiers had many peculiar attributes, one being a tendency to bleed data into nearby items. The upload equations, which Dr. Fox had never been able to fully eradicate, had formatted large chunks of the watch, revolver, and phone. Eventually, Fox had accepted it as a built-in redundancy, designed to take advantage of the product's environment. He had never had the courage to accept the tendency for what it truly was. He blamed himself. Computers had no problem forgetting things. It was people who did that. Fox had refused to consider the possibility that maybe the micronics didn't want to forget the ability to upload backup copies of its operating system. After all, the desire to continue, to extend existence, survival, was the linchpin of intellectual evolution. So the interface transformed common items into network nodes, boosting its capacity. This hadn't been a problem at the facility until the end. As common objects only held trace amounts of writable terrelium, half images and missing data packets were the predictable result. The gun, the phone, the watch, each had been infected with a portion of the system, yet incomplete in so many crucial and significant ways. Bobby was closest to the action, standing next to Doug and Jamie. He never saw Ash leave. She just vanished. After the man crashed into the canyon, Ash, Jeff, and Jack simply vanished. Once Bobby picked up the revolver, everything happened in slow motion. Evan and Doug picked things up off the ground and started to freak out. They were falling, tilted over the earth in an absurd defiance of gravity, and moving so slowly. Their faces and hands blurred before Bobby's eyes. It hurt his brain to look at them. Above him, he found the agents suspended in the air, drifting downward, 20 feet away. Bobby glared at them and raised the handgun. He fired 3 times and scored 3 hits as they fell in slow motion. The other kids looked at Bobby, confused. Bobby looked over at Evan, who was lying on his back, the muscles of his body twitching uncontrollably. Bobby turned and walked from the glen, staring at the gun. Each of the agents had been struck. The first fell against his mast, clutching it and taking it to the ground at a sprint. The other 2 fell, dangling at the end of a 4-foot leash, their kites pinwheeling behind them, landing on the fern-covered ground as gently as a parent putting a toddler to bed. Doug and Evan had collapsed into seizures, their eyes rolled up in their heads, muscles convulsing violently, mouths foamed. They both then vomited a foul green mess. In pursuit of Jack, Ashley had lost sight of Jeff. She realized she was only adding to her troubles by chasing after the dog and went back for her brother. By the time she reached him, Jeffrey was already terrified, stumbling along and crying. Ash put the prototype in her pocket and hugged him. They were exhausted, sweaty, scared, and tired. Ashley held her little brother until he quit sobbing. After a couple of moments, the sniffling stopped and Jeff was okay. They were on a shady section of the trail, and the sound of the leaves in the wind was calming. The tranquil summer breeze felt good on Ashley's back. Ash realized that time was no longer frozen. The wind blew and the trees moved, speaking to the children in their hushed yet open tones. She didn't have a watch to check, but the forest hadn't moved when she was holding the prototype. She put her hand into her pocket, touching the object. Nothing changed. The breeze continued and the trees swayed. "We have to find Jack," Ash said to the wet-eyed boy. Jeff nodded, and together they set off down the trail. In the observation lab, Ash and Jeffrey's systems came back online. Both children were experiencing significant adrenaline rushes, elevated heart rates, blood pressure, and all the other predictable symptoms. Mr. Reed and Mr. Samuel reached out to their control panels, attempting to balance the children's systems. "I'm not getting any response," Reed said. "Same here, no control. We've got eyes only," Samuel confirmed. "We saw this on the Red series. What was our protocol to reestablish?" Major Ross asked. "We lost the first one. We had to reinstall receivers on the tank models," Reed answered. "Well, that's not an option here," Ross said. "With Astral, they sent Taylor out into the field." "He went out on his own," Ross corrected. "He was successful," Samuel added. "Yeah, well, Astral wasn't carrying an amplifier, so we're in uncharted territory. Are the recorders working?" "We're streaming. Record is fine." Mr. Reed, Mr. Samuel, and the rest of the team watched the afternoon sunlight fade through Ash and Jeffrey's eyes as they searched for Jack. Chapter 21. Frequency Scrubbing. Back in the glen, Jamie tried to kick the watch from Doug's hand, but the convulsions had locked his fist tight around it. He looked as if he were being electrocuted. That was when the gunshot agents stood up. They wore bulletproof suits and were strapped with a variety of packs. Their helmets had sealed oxygen, and behind their visors, a 12-channel image translator identified everything in their surroundings. The agents checked their suits, no rips, no tears. The bulletproof material had held, and they gave each other thumbs up. They hadn't even been injured. The kids watched them in stunned silence. The tall agent raised his weapon and spoke. "Sinusoids." The other two agents also raised their weapons and sprayed a thick green gas across the canyon floor. The kids fell to the ground unconscious. Evan and Doug's convulsions stopped. The agents pried Pierce's watch and phone from their hands. "Let's get on with it," the tall one said. "What hit us?" the female asked. "We had one heavy atom item during most of the fall, but I think it might have multiplied. The doctor said something about it infecting other devices like the watch or that phone. Or that gun. The bullets, that's what hit us. They were charged, super dense," the third agent pointed out. "Where's the original?" the female asked. "I've got nothing on my scanner." "Hold on." The tall agent hit a switch on his headset, calling his home base. "Yes, sir. I'm reviewing the recording now. Time code 1237-2217. Yes, sir. Frame 18, she's gone." "Yes, sir. Copy that." "What about the revolver, sir?" "Copy. You want us to—" "Copy, sir. Out." He addressed his colleagues. "He says we have to find the bullets." Subordinate agents looked at each other, their expressions hidden under the shiny visors. "It was a revolver, right?" the third one said. "I see her," the female said, scanning the recorded footage. "Girl vanishes on 18, and at frame 26 the little boy disappears. At 2306 the dog vanishes too. 1, 2, 3. That's the prototype for sure. Should one of us pursue?" "No, they're sending additional units. We're RTB. Return to base." "Jesus, I recognize him. Those are Fox's kids," the tall agent said. "He's never left anything to chance." "I've got the kid who shot us. It was a revolver. There are no shells to worry about, just the bullets. Use your thermals, they'll still be hot." They scanned the ground. "I've got one," the female said. "So do I. I've got mine." "All right, here's a third. Let's sack them and get on with the business." The lead agent removed a black pouch of non-reflective cloth. The watch, the phone, and the 3 spent slugs were dropped inside and sealed up. The trio pulled off their packs and each assembled a strange rifle-like device. But instead of a proper barrel, they held a radar dish and a scanner. A clamp swung from the bottom, morbidly empty. "Either of you got a Meyer?" the tall agent asked. "No, they gave me a Morlet," the female answered. "It was all they had." "Shit, man, last week I was a noodle-cooking Mexican hat," the third agent laughed. "No way, they still got those things in service?" the tall one asked. "Palm Springs, it was all we had for the first year," the female confirmed. "Friggin' ghastly." Her colleagues laughed behind the tinted visors. "Screws you up plowing someone with a goddamn sombrero." "What have you got? You got a Meyer?" the third agent asked the leader. I don't think we got any portable models out here, which is kind of hard to believe, but what the hell, Morlid it is. Sucks to be them. The tall agent walked over to Doug and rolled him onto his stomach. With the dish rifle slung around his neck, the agent grabbed a handful of Doug's hair and pulled him up into a snake-like position. He locked the collar around the boy's neck and centered the scope on the back of his head. Letting the weapon take the boy's weight, the agent leaned into the sling, sighted in, and charged the dish. To scrub someone of a micronics infection, a blast of electricity had to be delivered to the entire organ at once, rebooting the system. As the charge built and the audible hum rose in pitch, the agent held the young man's skull in his sights. When the rifle chirped, he fired. Doug was awake, screaming. The initial blast was loud, as a mini bolt of lightning scoured the child's head. An excruciating experience, but after a few seconds it was over. Doug's body emptied its bowels and projectile vomited across the canyon floor. The agent unhooked the collar and let him slide to the ground. The Meyer coefficient is so much less invasive. What are you going to do? The third agent shrugged and blasted Evan. You have to admit, 3 seconds of Morlet beats being screwed with a sombrero. A whole minute? That has to hurt. The female agent blasted Jamie. Soon all the kids in the canyon had been scrubbed. They bagged up Alexander's shattered body and secured it to the lead agent's kite. The agents hopped aboard their kiteboards and left the canyon for higher elevation. Another two-man recovery team picked up Bobby's trail. He still carried the revolver in his hand and hadn't gotten too far. They came down on him from behind, firing the sinusoids while airborne, flooding his path. The gas enveloped him and Bobby hit the ground with a thud. He hadn't seen them coming and couldn't have fired the gun anyhow. In a fit of curiosity, he'd removed the shells from the revolver and pocketed them. Later that evening, Doug, Jamie, Evan, and the rest of the children woke, groggy and confused. They made their soiled way home, unable to remember much of what happened over the past few days, let alone that afternoon. Chapter 22. Jack and Bobby. After spending the remainder of the day looking for Jack, Ashley and Jeff found themselves at the far edge of the forested canyon. They had reached the northern tip of Beverly Hills, the flat expanse of the Los Angeles basin stretching away from them. Ashley and Jeff stared out at the city, shocked by the lights, traffic, and swell of pedestrians. They were allowed to play close to home, and while they pushed the envelope in the forest, the children had never dared hop the gate and cross into the forbidden city. Some pedestrians noticed their abrupt appearance, looking at them as if they were some wild forest creatures. Streaked with dirt and sweat, bits of leaf in their hair, Ash pulled Jeff back into the forest. "But Ash, what if he's out there?" Jeff said. Ash thought of how she'd last seen the dog. He'd been rabid. She was afraid he'd gotten his leash caught in a thicket and strangled. Ashley thought she'd been listening, but the noise of the encroaching city had long since drowned out any sounds made by a panicked dog. Ash began to despair they wouldn't find him. Jeff tugged at her arm, looking back at the city. He seemed determined that Jack had gone that way. Ashley refused to entertain him. She'd been overwhelmed by the people and the traffic. She'd always wondered why people stayed out of the forest, but she was glad they did. Ashley looked down the trail. The tall trees formed natural arches overhead, lights spilled down, shadows waving, the breeze rustling the limbs. Birds chirped and fluttered about with butterflies. That was when she saw it, Jack's leash, tangled in a thicket. But there was no Jack. "Jeff," Ashley said, pointing to the leash. "Oh, that's his! Jack! Jack!" he yelled into the darkening forest. It was getting late, closer to rush hour, and the sounds of the city traffic intruded, drowning out his call. "Ash, we have to find him. He could be lost or scared." Jeff was beginning to melt down. Ashley could see it coming. "Come on," she said. Together they picked the cord out of the brush. "He's out there, Ash." Jeff stared out into the city. "No, Jeff, he's a smart dog. He'll go home. I bet he'll be waiting for us. Come on. We have to go." "Ashley, please," he cried. Unable to argue or insist he come with her, Ashley put her arms around him. She led him away from the city back uphill. Ashley walked at his pace, and Jeff stayed with her. Going uphill was so much harder than going down. To his credit, Jeffrey didn't complain. Now Ash understood why people didn't come into their part of the forest. The steep climb was a natural barrier. They watched their shadows grow long under the afternoon sun. At the top of the slope, back on familiar ground, Jeffrey got a second wind. "I miss him already," he said. "I know, me too," Ashley answered. The pair got home just before dark. They'd wandered far across the canyon and come up the shallow side of the neighborhood, surprising their parents when they entered through the front door. The faintest light hung in the air. 30 seconds later, it was gone. Dinner was already on the table. Ashley's mom took the leash without question as to Jack's whereabouts. Ash and Jeff were told they were filthy and chased upstairs to wash. No one made any jokes. Pierce's blood, which had splattered all over Ashley, had either crusted off or faded in the failing light. It wasn't noticed until Ashley saw it in the sink. The first handful of water came back bright pink against the porcelain. The second rinse turned red, but the third was almost clear. Jeff turned to look outside and saw Jack scratching his ear in the backyard. He screamed Jack's name and sprinted from the bathroom. He bounded down the stairs, yelling all the way. Jack seemed normal, barked normal, and wrestled with Jeffrey. All normal. Ashley was glad to have the beagle back. When she got over Jeff's scream, she also realized, smiling, she had the bathroom to herself. Bobby Dunkirk woke near a puddle of vomit he instinctively recognized to be his own. He sat up, coughed, and shook his head. The revolver was gone. He stumbled to his feet and reached into his pocket. Bobby pulled out his fist and opened it to reveal 6 shiny brass shells. 3 were hollow and empty, spent. The other 3 were filled with heavy copper-coated rounds, artifacts of an ancient time. Only the richest citizens carried revolvers with old-school bullets. The bullets held Bobby's gaze. Speaking in a wordless language, alien concepts filled his mind. After several minutes of silent communication, he pocketed the heavy chunks of metal and made his way home. During dinner, Ashley was transfixed by the black rectangle lying next to her father's plate. She looked at him. He was eating, happy and calm. She was tempted to pull out the uncomfortable hunk of black metal in her own pocket, but she didn't. She remembered his order, never to touch it under any circumstances. Ashley looked at his rectangle. It was different from the one she'd found. After dinner, alone in her room, with the door closed, Ashley sat at her desk. Staring at the overhead clock, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the prototype. The clock didn't stop. She stared at it for a long time, almost a minute. The second hand never even ticked slowly. It just kept cruising perfectly. Ash looked at the device. It was almost identical to her father's. She noticed the button placement was just a little different. This rectangle had some curving to it and beveled edges. When she looked at it closely, she also saw it had dozens of seams. The button was hard. It took some effort to press it down into the device. She wrapped both hands around it and used one thumb atop the other to force the button down. She was met with a loud crack of metal as a wicked sharp blade snapped out through the end. Ashley looked at the clock. It kept ticking. She looked up to see her father enter the room. "So, it found you." "What?" she asked, rattled. "I knew sooner or later it would," Dr. Fox said. "I tried to stop it, but I guess there was nothing I could do. I thought it would choose Jeff." "What are you talking about?" Ashley asked. Her father blinked. She held up the knife. "What is this?" she asked. "That's a knife," he replied. "Is it yours?" She held it flat in her hand. "No, this is mine," he said, producing the item she'd seen him with at dinner. "Where did you get that?" he asked. "What? Where did you get that?" "It fell out of the sky," she said with open sarcasm. "Really? There was a man attached to it," she added. Fox laughed and brushed the blue-stained scar over his eye. "It's a tool, it's a weapon, it's an eating utensil. It's up to you, really," he said. Ashley looked down at it. She sat up in bed in her pajamas, the lights off. She'd had a nightmare. It was after midnight. She stood up beside her bed. The moonlight spilling through the windows lit the room well enough for her to see. She listened to the house. She didn't hear anything. She thought about earlier that night, trying to remember what had happened. Her eyes were drawn to the first drawer of her desk. She remembered getting ready for bed and looking at the object. The button hadn't done anything at all. It wasn't a knife, and her father had never entered the room. Ashley had taken it into his study and asked him what it was. He said it was a data drive. He hadn't shown the slightest interest in it. Ashley stared at the desk. She crossed the room and opened the center drawer. The object was laying right where she left it. She picked it up. It was heavy and serious. The clock didn't stop. She pressed the button. She pressed it hard. She pulled a pencil from her desk, discarded it for a tougher metal pen, and jammed down on the button. A port at the front end of the device opened up. She jammed the button with the pen the second time, and with a loud, rusty thwack, the blade popped out. It was shiny and black, serrated near the hilt, grooved with a polished silver blood gutter. Ashley stared at it. She knew, without a doubt, she had never seen it before. Not in her waking life, anyhow. The button had risen up, even with the smooth surface of the case again. Ashley pressed it a second time. It went down easily, and the blade retracted with another crack. Ashley put the knife back in the drawer. It looked out of place, surrounded by her pens, pencils, erasers, and more feminine possessions. She stared at it for a long moment before sliding the drawer closed. An hour or so earlier, Bobby had arrived home, entering the vast white structure through the kitchen. He went up the back stairs and into his private bathroom, decorated with shades and hints of blue. He stood the 6 bullets in a single horizontal line, the copper-coated loads on the left, the 3 empty fired shells on the right. He spent a few minutes just watching them, first focusing on them and then on their reflection in the mirror. Bobby stripped out of his clothes and took a shower. When he got out, the steam had obscured the mirror, but the bullets stood gleaming. They seemed to be in tune with his soul. They calmed him and yet excited him at the same time. He felt empowered and yet captivated by their presence. The boy dried himself and combed his hair, flat, back and to the side, the way his mother did it. He didn't like it, but it was out of his eyes. Bobby flossed and brushed his teeth. Usually he avoided these chores, but tonight he did them thoroughly, exactly as they should be done. Bobby pulled on his pajamas and a massive white terry cloth robe. He scooped up his bullets and carried them, his hands in his pockets, over to his bed. He climbed across it to the window and stood the shells on the wooden sill. Carefully he opened the window behind them. Ill at ease, he moved the shells. Seeing them there like that, something about it bothered him. He found the latches securing the window screen and pushed it out into the canyon below. Now the bullets were arranged before the open sky. He watched the moonlight reflecting off their surface. He fell asleep watching them. Chapter 23. Like a Thief. Ashley's journal, Friday morning, June 26, 2308. I don't know why my father carries around a knife, or why I'm having nightmares about it. Or even better, how does a knife make you hallucinate? There is something about it. Time slows down, or seems to. And my dad, he's acting all weird all of a sudden. What the hell is happening? Jeff woke later than usual. He slept in till almost 7:30. Ashley and her parents were sitting quietly in the kitchen. Jeff came downstairs still in his pajamas. For a moment, no one spoke. His mother took his hand. Honey, Jack died in his sleep last night. A couple of hours later, Dr. Fox had finished digging a nice-sized hole at the edge of the property. The new scar across his forehead had turned red and swollen while he dug. Ashley didn't ask about it, but Jeff did after an hour or so. Their father said he'd gotten it after a nasty spill on a wet bathroom floor, which was the truth, if only part of it. They put Jack in a towel-lined wooden box, and Dr. Fox set him into the deep hole. Several feet of dirt would cover the beagle's casket. The children looked on as Dr. Fox solemnly bowed his head. Today we bury our dear friend Jack. He was a good dog. Puppy still. He was a good soul. We are thankful for the time he shared with us, and we remember him fondly until the end of our days. Jeffrey leaned against his mother. Dr. Fox picked up the shovel and with blistered hands began filling in the hole. Anna led Jeff away from the grave, over to the canopied swing. They sat in the shade as Dr. Fox shoveled in the dirt. Ashley stood beside her father. She held a small bouquet of wildflowers and watched the dirt rise. Once he was finished turning the hole into a small hill, she set the flowers on the head of the grave. Dr. Fox said nothing further and carried the shovel back to the shed. Ashley's journal, June 26th, 2308. I know somehow it's my father's fault that Jack died. Just like I know he lied about the knife. Somehow, this all goes back to him. Jeff will be okay eventually, I hope, but I don't think we'll be hanging out in the canyon much this summer. Ashley's Journal, Sunday, June 28th, 2308. Jeff stayed in the backyard most of that first day, but he hasn't been outside much since. He's been glued to vid streams and net games. Otherwise, he seems fine. I bet when school starts, he'll be back to his old self. I haven't seen Doug or Jamie or any of the other kids since we were in the canyon that day. In fact, I haven't seen anyone outside since then. The neighborhood's been dead quiet. You can feel it in the air. It's gotten hot. Doors stay closed and blinds are pulled tight. Everyone is inside blasting the AC. Jeff says their gamer IDs are online. Only tourists and strangers go down into the park now. Ashley's Journal, Monday, July 6th, 2308. My dad's been home a lot more lately. In fact, it seems as if he's here all the time now. He even took us to see fireworks. He seems a little different, but I like it. I've still got that thing in my desk. I know it's his. It looked just like the one he had at dinner. He's got another one. Why would he have two? I haven't touched it. Camp. Today we leave for camp. I don't know why I complained so much about this. It feels all anticlimactic now. Kind of interested. I wonder what they're going to teach us. Last summer was boring. I hope this one is better. With brief goodbyes to their mother, Ash and Jeff boarded the shuttle. Dr. Fox had been summoned to Washington and left the day before. Ash and Jeff waved to their mom from the shuttle window and watched their home fade into the distance. The transport was half full, all children, all bound for the same destination. Every summer, hundreds of kids attended the camp programs at the Heart of the City summer camp facility. Jeff would be on one of the 36 terraformed levels, while Ashley would be on another. New programs began each Monday, and the courses rotated regularly, graduating students all summer. Ash and Jeff stayed together until protocol separated them. They didn't make a big thing of it. The time came and they waved each other goodbye. As she watched Jeff go, Ash was overcome with a feeling of loss. She didn't know what to do with it, so she swallowed the emotion and went to look for her quarters. Chapter 24. Dirty Bullets. On the first day after his exposure to the corrupted handgun, Bobby found himself compelled to return to the forest. He walked all day, exploring in an ever-widening corkscrew fashion. He kept moving but never got far from home. He saw none of the other kids. He didn't get hungry or lonely or scared. Instead, he studied the forest as if he were mapping it with his mind. He noticed every patch of brush, every rise and fall of the mountainous terrain. He watched the birds and the squirrels and listened to their chattering, but didn't attempt to translate it. Late in the afternoon, Bobby noticed the bronze shell casings had tarnished, accelerated by the oils in his hands, as he found that at least one of the 6 cylinders almost constantly. After returning home, Bobby approached his father, asking if they had any polishing products in the house. Predictably, his father asked, "What for?" Bobby showed him the bullets. Bobby's father felt his chest go tight. His breath caught in his throat. He looked at the naked shells. He felt consumed with energy and invigorated just by the sight of the items in his young son's hand. After a moment, Mr. Dunkirk didn't even know what it was he was looking at, but he couldn't look away. Bobby's arm grew tired. He lowered his hand. His father stood in a daze, calm, quiet, and distant. Bobby had forgotten what it was he asked him for. The boy turned and left him in the hall. A few moments later, Mr. Dunkirk snapped out of his trance and went to his own bedroom, overcome with fatigue. Back in his bedroom, Bobby set the shelves on the windowsill and settled in, watching them with mute fascination, as his father had. They seemed to speak to him, only he couldn't say just what the message was. Monday, June 29th, 2308. Monday morning, Bobby woke, dressed, ate breakfast, and slipped out of the house. His father's car was already gone. Bobby wandered down into the canyon, the bullets secure in his pocket. Before long, he'd found a couple of other neighborhood kids and shown them the shells. Together, they stood the shells on the bottom of the slide and took seats around them. A pair of moms soon noticed the children and friends all sitting, staring at the foot of the slide. They drifted over to investigate the strange phenomenon. By the time they were close enough to recognize the bullets, it was too late. They had entered the shell's sphere of influence and took seats on the wood-chip-covered ground with the children. Bobby noticed their arrival and considered the implications. He wondered if the adults would try and take his bullets. He wasn't afraid the other children might, but the presence of the two parents unnerved him. A few minutes later, Bobby rose and picked up the bullets. Several of the children rose with him, smiling but not speaking. Bobby smiled in return and walked from the slide toward the tree line a short distance away. The crowd of children and adults followed Bobby from the playground into the overgrown forest. They made their way down the pathways, wandering from gully to glen, until Bobby found a large, shade-ensconced rock. Bobby climbed onto the rock, and his disciples settled themselves around it. Bobby stood the 6 brass shells on the smooth surface of the broad stone. It took him a moment to align them, but none fell or rolled away. For the remainder of the afternoon, Bobby and his group communed with the debris, metallic flotsam, infected with a power never before encountered by modern men. Mr. Dunkirk grew angry and irritable after exposure to Bobby's bullets. He left meetings early and snapped at his staff. In the middle of the afternoon, he canceled the remainder of his schedule and rushed home. Dunkirk arrived and asked after his youngest son. His other children, Evan and Anne, hadn't seen Bobby, but guessed that he'd gone down into the forest. Mrs. Dunkirk was not at home, so Mr. Dunkirk decided to go looking for his son and those fascinating bullets. Martin exited through the kitchen and down the tiered balconies at the back of the house. He stopped at the landscaping shed at the edge of the property and hefted an old-fashioned, short-handled sledge. The ball of the hammer was a bit smaller than his fist, a heavy chunk of metal attached to the stout wooden handle. It felt right in his hand. Martin proceeded down into the darkening canyon. It took him the better part of 2 hours to stumble across Bobby and his silent entourage, sitting in the dark of twilight. He walked past them twice. Quite certain they were alone, he came forward. No one turned at his approach. Bobby, facing his father from atop the rock, never even raised his eyes from the bullets. Mr. Martin Dunkirk lifted the hammer high and brought it down with a thwack into the head of the woman to his right. In her mid-40s and significantly overweight, Rhonda Tremaine's lifeless body fell to the side, her shattered skull pulling away from Martin's hammer with a sucking sound. Martin raised the hammer again, bringing it down on the second woman. Younger, more attractive, but just as dead, Michelle Larson crumpled to the ground. 4 more times that night Mr. Dunkirk raised his hammer, crushing the skulls of the children. When he finished, Bobby raised his eyes, meeting his father's. In that single glance it was clear, Bobby was the master of the bullets. Martin could worship, but only with Bobby's permission. The bullets would not permit any harm to come to their master. The hammer slipped from Martin's grasp. Mr. Dunkirk wanted to sit with Bobby in the shells, but the corpses were in his way. Bobby watched the reflections of moonlight on metal as his father carried the corpses to a narrow ravine a short distance from the glen. Almost near enough to straddle, Martin dropped them and watched them tumble and crash 40 feet to the bottom. Then he collapsed the sides of the defile around them, filling in the makeshift grave. Finally, Martin joined his son in their silent communication with the infected bullets. They were pleased with their ministers. Bobby would remain their caretaker, seeking out converts during the day, and Martin would return at night to keep the congregation small. It worked for almost 3 whole weeks, until a previously planned family vacation upset their apple cart of murder.